Hello, it is currently 6 o'clock and welcome to Good Morning Scotland. Coming up, we will be discussing Macbeth written by Shakespeare, and we will be talking about Acts 3 to 5.
Thank you, Brendan. In the beginning of Act 3, Banquo seems somewhat jealous of Macbeth in his newly acquired position as Thane of Cawdor and King. He then thinks about it and all the predictions the witches gave and remembers that he was prophesied to have descendants as kings. He tells himself to shut up, realizing that he will in fact have fortune in his life only through his children and grandchildren and not himself. While Banquo has gone somewhere riding on a horse, Macbeth delivers a soliloquy telling the reader of his true feelings about Banquo. He states that our fears in Banquo stick deep, illustrating how he is in fact afraid of Banquo, which he gives the reasoning of Banquo being noble and someone who is willing to take the risks. Macbeth then also thinks about the prophecies that the witches gave and realizes that for Banquo's descendants to be kings, then someone from his bloodline must strip the power from Macbeth as someone in his bloodline, and it would have to be Banquo or his children and grandchildren. He then begins to believe that killing Duncan will only benefit Banquo's sons, as Macbeth is very anxious, scared, and says that he has handed over my everlasting soul to the devil so that they could be kings, referring to Banquo and his sons as the devil. Macbeth and Banquo's seemingly strong friendship has been destroyed over the jealousy of Banquo and the anxiety of Macbeth. As Macbeth says, he won't be healthy until Banquo is dead. The change in attitudes towards one another is undoubtedly because Macbeth's sudden gain in power and the jealousy of Banquo and anxiety of Macbeth that came from it. With this gain in power, he has become more and more noticeably paranoid with his surroundings and even his closest accomplices, making him believe that he must kill Banquo and his son in order to remain safe and keep his title as King, Thane of Cawdor, and Thane of Glamis. While discussing the two, Lady Macbeth doesn't seem to like Macbeth's want to have them killed. She's surprised that Macbeth still isn't happy, even though he has gained everything he could ever need, Thane of Glamis, Cawdor, and the King. She doesn't need or want to persuade Macbeth to kill Banquo and Fleance, illustrating the reversal between the two, as Macbeth had to be talked into killing King Duncan by Lady Macbeth. The more passive Lady Macbeth could come from her new position as queen, and her not wanting to mess up what she has. Although Macbeth is anxious, scared, and unhappy, Lady Macbeth has gained everything she's ever wanted and is very satisfied with her situation. Although unhappy, Macbeth is the only one making the plan for the murder, illustrating confidence which could have come from his newly gained power.
Macbeth sees the ghost of Banquo sitting at the table and is very confused and becomes anxious after seeing the ghost. It turns out that it's just one of his hallucinations, and he also hallucinated when he saw the floating dagger before killing King Duncan. Lady Macbeth denies the account of Macbeth seeing Banquo's ghost and notices that Macbeth is just causing another commotion. Macbeth tries to explain to Lady Macbeth where the ghost is, but she refuses to believe anything that he says. The ghost reappears to Macbeth, and again becomes frightened, and another commotion starts. Macbeth's visitors become more worried about his mental state, and Lady Macbeth also realizes that his mental state is getting out of hand. She says, "Think of this, good peers, but as a thing of custom. 'Tis no other, only it spoils the pleasure of the time." She's telling the lords that these actions are customary and something that happens very often. Lady also wants the lords to know not to worry about Macbeth and do not let his actions ruin the mood and the pleasurable time they're having. Lady Macbeth decides for the lords to go home because of the defective state that Macbeth is in. In Macbeth and Lady Macbeth's relationship, Lady Macbeth is in far more control than Macbeth because of his poor mental state of the immoral actions he has committed. When Macbeth becomes nervous, His hallucinations become out of control, and Lady Macbeth must step in and control his mental state. Without Lady Macbeth, Macbeth would go mentally insane due to his often frightfulness because of the actions he committed. Lady Macbeth also must keep Macbeth in line because of him being the recent king and his actions always being observed by numerous people. If the king were to show signs of being nervous or frightened so often, people would become worried about his health and will investigate what's wrong with him and why he is acting this certain way. With Lady Macbeth, she helps him realize that if he is caught from what he has done with his past to make himself the king and fulfill their plans, he and she will most likely lose everything they worked for and become executed. Brendan, to you.
So now we're in Act 4, and Macbeth encounters witches. And the witches have apparitions that they release to him because Macbeth is demanding them to tell him what he wants to know. And so the first apparition is an armored head that says, "Beware Macduff, beware the Thane of Life," meaning that Macduff could be the one to kill and overthrow Macbeth, which is relating to the second apparition. The second apparition is a bloody child saying, "Be bloody, bold, and resolute. Laugh to scorn the power of man, for none of women born shall harm Macbeth." Meaning that Macduff battles Macbeth, and the apparitions mean by this that Macduff was not born in a normal way. He was torn from his mother's womb, so technically he wasn't born of a woman. Then the third apparition appears and is a crowned child with a tree that says, "Macbeth will never vanquish be until great Birnam wood to high Dunsinane Hill shall come against him." Macduff leads armies against Macbeth where they hide in Dunsinane Hill. And they cut trees to disguise themselves, and they march, making it seem as if the woods are moving. Macbeth's perspective changes because he stops worrying after he hears that Birnam Wood will march to Dunsinane Hill, because Macbeth thinks that trees do not march, so he thinks he's invincible now because he legit thinks that the trees are going to be walking. Because he misinterprets Birnam Wood marching, thinking that the actual trees will do the walking. However, this symbolizes Malcolm's attack, but Macbeth is not worried because he thinks that it's nothing because trees cannot walk. Macbeth thought that what they meant was that the actual trees will be walking, but really it's just the army disguised in trees.
Thanks. Hello, this is Tim reporting live from Philadelphia. During Act 3, Macduff travels to Scotland. Thanks. Hello, this is Tim reporting live from Philadelphia. During Act 3, Macduff flees Scotland and travels to England. Macduff has received word of Banquo's death, and although it has been blamed on his son Fleance, Macduff believes Macbeth is responsible for sending the murderers. Macduff journeys to England in order to plead with King Henry for troops to help him fuel a war to overthrow and possibly kill Macbeth. Lady Macduff does not know the reason for her husband's departure, and as one could imagine, she is not happy about it. She believes that her husband is a traitor and scared for leaving her and her son in this time of crisis. In my opinion, both the actions of Macduff and the fears of Lady Macduff are justified. Macduff understands that he is leaving his lady, and there is a chance that she could be harmed, but he understands also that the fate of his country is at risk. He knows he has to do something if he wants to stop Macbeth, and he must do it soon. Macduff is one of the only characters who has taken action in order to fight Macbeth in the tyranny over Scotland. Lady Macduff's fears, however, are equally as understandable. She rightly suspects that she is in danger, and she has the right to say that her husband had abandoned her, and their son in a very dangerous time and place for them. She feels betrayed, and I believe she was betrayed to an extent. Macduff likely understood the circumstances and still took the risk into account. She tells her son that his father was a traitor, which she honestly believed at the time. When her son questions what makes a traitor, she says it's someone who breaks a promise. She argues that all traitors deserve to be hanged by the honest men. Her son replies that the honest men are silly, they're fools, for there are enough liars and murderers in the world to hang all the honest men. Shortly after this conversation, a murderer sent by Macbeth enters their home. The murderer tells Macduff's son that his father was a traitor, and the boy calls him a liar and a villain. In response, the murderer stabs the boy, killing him, and the boy begs his mother to run as he dies from the wound.
Thanks, Tim. This is Brandon Blythe coming at you live from Good Morning Scotland News. We are at the scene of the case where the conclusion begins to start when Macduff, the main suspect, decides he needs to gain revenge on Macbeth for killing his family by killing him. Malcolm, one of the main suspects, is being very pushy, and he's saying many things that are trying to instigate Macduff, like use the anger to make your sword sharper. This leads them to get an army to go to Macbeth's castle. They've found out all of his secrets and believe that he's a very corrupt king. Macbeth is in a very calm state at this point, and his servants are very frightened. He says, "This battle will either secure my reign forever or else topple me from the throne." Macbeth's wife, Lady Macbeth, dies, and he shows almost no emotion and explains how he knew it was coming soon. Eventually, Macduff's army reaches the castle, and Macduff gets inside and confronts Macbeth. They begin fighting, and it is shown that Macduff is victorious, and he ends up walking out of the fight holding Macbeth's head in his hand. The final scene is of Malcolm and Macduff rejoicing and getting excited for the new era that they have in front of them. They explain how they have a lot to do, and their first course of action is to make some of the Thanes and Kingsmen the first Earls of Scotland. The three witches in the story play a huge role in the downfall of Macbeth. By offering him prophecies, such as being the king, they change his behavior over the course of the story and lead him to do things that he would never have thought of doing in the past. The most prevalent is him having to kill the king in order to become the king, because the witches told Macbeth that he would be him one day. He did become king, however, many believed he was a corrupt ruler, and all of the people he killed ended up coming back to bite him in the end because the people revolted and Macduff ended up killing him. The irony of the story is that Macbeth had to kill the king in the beginning to take his role. Ironically, Macbeth was killed while he was killed king by Macduff. And Macduff ended up taking the crown by killing him, which is exactly what Macbeth did to get the crown in the first place. The dramatic irony is when Macbeth does not know that the soldiers are under the moving forest. Dramatic irony is when the audience knows that something is going to happen to a character in the story, but the character is unaware. In this instance of the case, the audience knows that Macbeth is going to be attacked because they know that the soldiers marching on him are the Birnam Wood branches, but Macbeth does not believe it. Thank you. This is Brandon Blythe reporting out. And that's the case, ladies and gentlemen, of Macbeth. You can check out for live updates and reports available on our website, www.goodmorningscotland.com. Thank you, ladies and gentlemen, and good morning, Scotland.